Hey, I just wanted to let you know this video kept getting claimed. Unfortunately, you might have seen me post that on my community page. I just wanted to let you know it might be a little bit boring, and I'm sorry I had to cut all the clips out, but if you want to see the full thing with clips, it is on my Patreon for free. I'll have that linked down below. Hi, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kyla, and today we're going to be talking all about the new LulaRich documentary. Before we get into it, I'll pop my Instagram up on the screen here. If you don't follow me over there, you definitely should. The other thing is, I'm sorry if the audio sounds weird. I just tested and it's at least working, but I don't know how it's going to sound. It's my first time using an actual mic instead of the built-in one on the camera, so bear with me if it sounds a little funky. I'm really sorry. Hopefully it'll be okay though. But with that being said, grab a drink and we'll get into it. I just made myself a nice little midday, it's actually a coffee, but I guess it's hard to tell because of the cup, but anyways, midday coffee. I do have some notes here, so I will be looking down occasionally at that just to make sure I touch on everything. But let's get started. So for those of you who haven't heard of it before, LulaRich is a docuseries that just came out on Amazon Prime. It's a 4-part series talking all about Lularoe, how it started, the issues that they faced in Lularoe, not only the CEOs, but also all of the consultants that were in Lularoe. It talks about the corporate shit show that Lularoe was, and a lot more. It's basically like that how it started versus how it's going meme, but in series form. If you haven't heard of Lularoe before, it was a pretty well-known MLM, but I feel like now, after all the fiasco, a lot less people are really into it. But Lularoe is an MLM that's primarily known for the clothing they sell, specifically the leggings, which were known to be like super soft, and they were in really crazy colorful patterns. There was always new patterns, but they did make shirts, dresses, and so on. But they're mostly known for, at least nowadays, the leggings. And with this MLM specifically, it is one where you have to buy stock to start. So unlike the MLMs that we're most familiar with, like Monet, Beachbody, and stuff, where the people purchase products for their own use, but they don't have to have stock, Lularoe is one of the ones where you actually buy what products you want to sell. And I'm not going to recap every single thing, obviously, that's said in the documentary, because one, if you want to watch it, that would probably spoil it, and also if you already have watched it, I'm sure it would be pretty boring for me to just like re-go over everything. But I will touch on like what I thought was really important or stuff that I found super interesting. So the first episode was titled Startup, and as the title implies, it took a look at the startup of the company, what started Lularoe, who the founders are, just kind of things like that. But it was kind of a creative title because Deanne, who is the founder, like the creator of Lularoe, her maiden name was actually Startup as well. The episode talked a bit about like their lives, how they met. It mentioned the Mormon church, which comes up a little bit throughout the documentary because they are both Mormon, and that kind of ties into how they met. And they went on to tell us that they have 14 kids, 2 of which got married to each other, which they just kind of like dropped that and laughed, saying, haha, we'll send out an invitation inviting people to the marriage of our daughter and our son, which like, nice, and she wanted to buy them these expensive dresses and clothing that she saw in stores, but she couldn't afford to. One day when she was out, she saw a man selling the designer dresses she saw in the store, and they were like a way cheaper price. She was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. She bought a bunch of them, and she was surprised to know that no one else that she knew really like knew that he was selling those. So she went on to suggest to him that she could have a dress party and sell his dresses, because she knew a bunch of people that she was friends with would be interested in that. And he apparently said yes. She sold 300 dresses according to her story, and she was able to keep the profits, and this started what was her job for 27 years, having dress parties and selling them. And then one day, one of her daughters asked her to make a maxi skirt for her. Deanne made her the skirt. That's how she started making product on her own. And this is what eventually morphed into Lularoe. She stopped selling the dresses altogether and was just selling the skirts that she made herself. She said later down the road in 2012, she met a lady named Brittany in Utah who wanted to buy her skirts, and she was buying them for like a group of 10 people. Deanne called her husband Mark and said she's buying so much, like what can we do to sweeten the deal for her basically? And Mark said sell them to her for a discount and then she can go and sell them to her friends for a profit. Deanne did that, and this essentially formed what is and was Lularoe. That's kind of how it started, and then obviously you, I'm sure, can imagine how that sort of turned into the MLM structure, which was people buying from them and selling and recruiting more people to keep buying from them. And then Lularoe officially started in 2013. And the name, which I never understood this before, I just thought like it was kind of a weird name. A lot of people get it mixed up with Lululemon, which I saw a meme, I'll put it up on the screen here, that was like, I'm sorry to Lululemon for telling everyone I know that they're a cult, which like, I get that because I've had so many people ask me like, is Lululemon really an MLM? What's up with Lululemon? And I'm like, no, it's Lularoe. And what that name means is it was their 3 first grandchildren, Lucy, Lola, and Monroe. So they put those 3 names kind of together and got Lularoe. And one thing that I noticed when they started playing the interviews during the documentary, all of the top sellers that they were interviewing, it seemed like they kind of started it because they saw these leggings online, like everybody wanted them, everybody was showing them, and they couldn't actually figure out how to just buy them. A lot of the top sellers who started at the very beginning of Lularoe saw online their friends posting about these leggings, wanted to buy them, couldn't, reach out to the friend saying like, hey, oh my gosh, I want a pair of leggings. Like, oh, I want that maxi skirt you're showing. And that is when their friends introduced the business opportunity to them. So that's interesting because I feel like even now to this very day, when this was in 2013, MLM still use that exact same tactic where they don't want to tell you the name of the product. They don't want you to know how to get it because then you have to ask them. So it's really interesting to me that that's how a lot of the top Lularoe sellers actually got into it, was just trying to ask people like, hey, where do I even get this? And they mentioned the startup cost being like anywhere from $5,000 plus, which I mentioned that earlier, but that's just so insane. And then one thing also that Deanne said that stood out to me in the documentary was she said that she wanted to identify an underutilized resource. And when she was saying that, she was referring to stay-at-home moms. Referring to people as a resource to begin with is a little bit odd, especially in that context. But she was saying that they have a lot of people of faith, and she was speaking about Mormonism there, saying that they're attracted to the business because they can work from home. You know, they can still be homemakers and be there for their kids. And then that's kind of what made me realize like, wow, she literally just confirmed that they try to attract people of faith and specifically stay-at-home moms, and they try to like exploit that want to stay at home with their kids to get them to join the business. Anyways, flash forward a little bit. After the business really started to grow, Deanne and Mark met with their kids and they said, hey, you know, we want to offer you guys positions. They wanted to keep it like in the family, so to speak. Yeah, it just became very obvious that none of them were qualified. And Deanne's nephew, Sam, also started working for the business, and he himself said he wasn't qualified to work for a business at that magnitude. He was hired on as the event planner. And once he was hired on to do that, that's kind of what started the conventions and seminars that MLMs all do now, but that Lularoe was doing. And so that started with him bringing in Mario Lopez to present Deanne an award and then take pictures with everyone at the convention afterwards. And from that, they weren't even planning for this to happen, but obviously people were posting their pictures with Mario Lopez all over social media. And that created a huge boom in new recruits and new people trying to join the business. And that, I think, is when they started to realize that making these big, huge, crazy conventions and selling the lifestyle would actually draw more people in. So that was very interesting because I feel like initially it was about like selling the product and getting more people on board, but to sell product. But within that time period, it kind of flipped and they realized like, wow, if we make these conventions crazy and we sell this lifestyle, we don't even have to sell the product because so many people want to sign up to go to these conventions and blah, blah, blah. And at that point, Sam mentioned he no longer even had a budget for the events. And he at one point speculated that one of the events cost $30 million between hiring Katy Perry to sing and a whole bunch of crazy stuff. Now, another issue that the documentary brought up was that people were instructed to go into debt to join the business. And again, this is something we see a lot, and I like that they touched on this. So they were promoting, like they had pictures and slogans and posters up saying make full-time income with part-time work. So they were literally promoting that to their following. And Deanne said specifically that they always said not to go into debt. And a lot of the ex-retailers who were interviewed noted that even if they didn't say specifically go into debt in so many words, they would say like you have to join through any means necessary, like just no matter what you have to do, you have to join, which obviously leads people to think, oh, well, if I have to join, I could get an extra credit card. I could take out debt. Some women were even selling breast milk to join the MLM, and they made like $20,000 through selling breast milk, which is insane. Now, one thing I really loved about the documentary, just because obviously I don't want to just like recap the whole thing without telling you what I like. One thing I loved in the documentary was they would show clips of Deanne and Mark being interviewed or in conferences saying things, and then they would cut to the lawsuit which happened between the Washington Attorney General and Deanne and Mark, and they would be lying through their teeth, like just flat out, no, I didn't say that. Oh, I don't know what that is. Blah, blah, blah. And then literally there would be a clip right after or right before of them saying that exact same thing they claim they never said. So I really think the editing there was pretty key, because it was very cool to see like right after each other the blatant lies, like there was no attempt to cover it up. And another thing that I found really interesting that was revealed through the docuseries was there was a corporate employee named Daryl, and he revealed in his interview that when he started working for Lularoe in the corporate office, he was hired on for data entry, and they didn't even have a data entry system. They were literally using a Google Doc for a $2 billion company. So if you don't know what a Google Doc is, it's essentially, as it sounds, it's through Google, so like on your Google Drive or whatever, and you can invite people to have access and you can all update it. So I could make a Google Doc and add 5 friends, and we could all go in and see what's on it. We could make changes, we could add information. But I'm sure, as you can imagine, that would be hard enough to coordinate with like 5 to 10 friends. A $2 billion company using a Google Doc is not only not secure, but also, and this is something that Daryl mentioned, you could be adding something into the Google Doc and then literally someone else is typing over in the same slot that you're typing in and just undoing whatever you're putting in. So it was a huge mess. And this was the first look in the documentary into just how poorly run Lularoe was, because they do get into it a lot more. And that's something as well that I definitely recommend you check out the documentary for. I think it was the second episode that really dove into corporate, but it was just mind-blowing to see like what was going on, just how absolutely insane everything was. And that's also something I hadn't ever heard of before. And it also kind of reminded me and makes me wonder what goes on behind closed doors at Monat, because even though this was about Lularoe, Monat is kind of the same, where it started with a guy who created his MLM and then his whole family started working for him. So I just wonder if it's similar there. Another important topic that LulaRich talked about was that everyone felt this very overarching need to have a certain look. They all said they needed to have their hair and makeup done all the time, that they were instructed to look like rich, present a certain way, even that they had to look like thin, which ties into it a little bit later as well. But they definitely wanted to have everyone have a certain look. It was also mentioned in the series, and I'm gonna quote this directly because this is what they said. I personally love that this was touched on, but I wish they would have touched more on that. Like, I basically wrote pretty much what they said about that. They talked a little bit about it. One woman who worked for corporate and also did the business side of it, named Lachey, she talked a little bit more about it and how like there wasn't really any people of color at all. And same with another woman. She mentioned too that she was one of very few people of color in the business as a whole. I find oftentimes most MLMs that I look at, like there's very little diversity on their page. I just wish they would have touched on that a little bit more and provided a little bit more education, because I thought it was really, really good that they brought that point up. But then they didn't really say like why or what could be done to change that or why it's important. Like, obviously a lot of people understand why it's important to have diversity in companies, but I think it would have been good for them to touch a little bit more on why they think that MLM, specifically Lularoe, since that's what this was about, was kind of focusing on like a very white-centric business model. But yeah, and then the next part that I kind of wrote down about was that Roberta was saying that the real money was in recruitment bonuses, because you'd spend so much to get the inventory, and then whatever you could sell, you might barely make a profit, but factor in like business expenses or anything and you pretty much like just break even, or you might even lose money on it. And when asked about the bonus structure, Deanne explained it by saying that the whole point of getting a bonus plan was because the business was growing so fast and she couldn't train everyone. So she thought, why not have people, you know, get a little bit extra to tell their story. That's how she explained it to the interviewers. And literally right after this, it cuts to the state of Washington versus Lularoe. And she said that she didn't create the bonus plan and doesn't know what it is. And the next issue, which we talk about a lot here on my channel, is that all the retailers that were interviewed said that Lularoe did ask them to go on. Specifically, Deanne wanted them to go on and have certain posts going up to flex their lifestyle or to thank Lularoe. They said that it felt like every single positive experience in your life, they were supposed to attribute to Lularoe, and it even started a hashtag that was called Because of Lularoe, where they would be posting like if they bought a car or a house or even just something like I mentioned, like they're at home cooking breakfast with their kids. Everything was hashtag Because of Lularoe. They introduced a couple named Tiffany and Paul, and Tiffany had said that, and these were top earners as well. Tiffany said that she posted a photo where she was standing in front of their house and people were commenting just saying like, oh, you got such a nice house. And Deanne actually got mad at her for not using the hashtag Because of Lularoe. But like the impression that I got was that the house was not because of Lularoe, so why would she put that on there? And then again, Deanne lied when she was asked in the interviews if she knew what the hashtag was. Another thing that I found really weirdly culty was that they started having events for people who weren't in the business because they were getting so many people wanting to join that they had like a 6 to 8 week waiting period to onboard people. They started having the queue club, where if you were in the queue waiting to be onboarded, which again, it could take you like 6 weeks to get the phone call that they'll let you join, you could go to these queue club events and they would run like competitions and not competitions. They would run like sweepstakes basically, where you could enter, and then if your name gets drawn, you get to get onboarded that day, and like that was the prize, which again, I just found it so weird. Like imagine entering a contest and your prize is that you get to spend $5,000 to join Lularoe's business, which again just reads very cult. And then the next episode, I think it was the second or third episode, was very into the corporate stuff, which I found super, super interesting. And it got to the point where they were expecting way, way too much out of their team. Like the designer was saying that they had to come up with 100 designs for like prints a day. 100 designs a day is insane. Like I don't even think I know of 100 patterns, let alone coming up with 100 different designs a day. Lachey mentioned as well, because she was on the onboarding team, she said that her team sometimes had days where they did $1 million in sales for onboarding in one day, just on her team. And the next thing that people touched on that I felt was really important is that Lularoe was encouraging people to live outside of their means, to flex this luxury lifestyle, to spend all the money they made on either new stock or just spending it on luxury items that they can share with their following. A reason for that is because if people are in this company and like, let's say they make $100,000 a month, but they're spending $100,000 a month, they can't quit. They need the business still. And Lularoe definitely wanted people to be dependent on them. Like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. There are people making like 50 to 100K a year, or even some of them 100K a month, and still living paycheck to paycheck, which to me says a lot. And one thing that they did mention, Deanne and Mark did mention their Mormon faith. A lot of people in the MLM happen to be Mormon too. Some of the people that they interviewed were Mormon. I know Paul and Tiffany said that they were. And typically, from my understanding anyways, Mormon women aren't supposed to work outside the home. So it would make sense why they pitched to Mormon women, because this is a job that they can do from home. And they also mentioned there was a lot of idolizing of Deanne and Mark as well as the top earners, which again, that's something I find interesting because I'm not going to pretend to know the most about Mormonism, but from everything I've heard and read about it, it seems like you're not supposed to have like other gods. You're not supposed to treat other things as gods. You're not supposed to idolize people and things. So it was really interesting, that aspect of it. At one point, I guess Mark was even on the stage quoting Mormon scripture, and he also likened himself to the creator and founder of Mormonism, which was something that put Paul and Tiffany off a little bit, it seemed like, when they talked about that. And Roberta mentioned as well that she noticed after a while that there was a lot of control, like even control over how they dressed, how they looked, how much they weighed. She said most of them were blonde, white, and skinny. To me, that aspect, especially the skinny part, leads into like the gastric sleeve fiasco, which was a whole other thing. The documentary did touch on like gender roles, as well as how Lularoe tended to pitch themselves as something that was like breaking gender stereotypes and empowering women. But it seemed like for the most part, they were actually reinforcing the gender stereotypes that they believed in, like that the man should be the head of the household, that a woman needs to submit to a man. And they had a really, really big focus on women retiring their husbands and bringing them into their business, which can seem like a good thing. Like I think if I was making $100,000 a month, I wouldn't necessarily want my boyfriend to work at a job outside the home if he could be here and helping me out with my business. So I understand that side of it, but it seemed like Deanne and Mark really pushed it because it wasn't supposed to be just the woman's business. And Tiffany and Paul made a good point of that. When it was Tiffany's business, she was the one that started it basically, and like Paul helped out, but she did most of the work. And every time they saw Deanne and Mark, they would either only address Paul or they would address Tiffany as Tiffany, Paul's wife. Like she wasn't her own person and it wasn't her own business. And they always specified way that they wanted to make sure that the men had some level of like power in the home. Deanne also used her mom's book in her teachings a lot, and her mom's book, which is called The Secret Power of Femininity. I wasn't able to find like any copies of it, but from what they said about it in the docuseries, Paul mentioned that the training basically included sayings like how to use your special parts to get your man to do what you want. That's what Paul said. And Roberta said she was given the advice of, all you have to do as a woman is get on your knees for 5 minutes a day and your husband will buy you whatever you want. Obviously is sexist and not helpful advice at all. And Ashley as well had kind of a similar experience where when she started out earning her husband and just where she was putting her energy and time kind of changed a little bit, her marriage started to falter a little bit as a result of that, it seemed. And she said that she had mentioned that, and the advice she was given was to read The Proper Care and Feeding of Husbands, which is apparently about a woman's role to be submissive, not have contrary feelings, and so on, which obviously she was not too pleased with that being the advice that she got as well. Okay, and then Courtney was also interviewed, and she mentioned that when she hit the role of mentor, which is like I think the highest or second highest role in the company, they got her to go to California to have like a mentors meeting, and she brought her husband, and they talked to him about like they were basically like interviewing with her, and then they just like started talking to him instead, telling him that he should quit his job and work for her. And he was like, I'm not quitting my job. And then they told her like everything wrong. Afterwards, she said she cried for an hour while they told her everything wrong with their relationship and why it wouldn't work out, and that it would be better if he quit his job, which is so manipulative. And again, just like it's very much a cult tactic where if your family and loved ones won't join you in it, then they want you disconnected with them. So they're going to say, everything's wrong with your marriage and you either have to leave him or he has to join you because otherwise your relationship is not good and blah blah blah. Lularoe always said it under the guise of like they bring families together, but it really did seem more like what Paul said. It was to make families completely dependent on Lularoe, because if they have an outside income, if the wife wants to quit, that's a more realistic possibility. Whereas if the whole family is involved in Lularoe, there's no quitting. Like you have to stay in it to support your family, and it feels very much like you're trapped. And the other thing they touched on, which to a lot of people, this part was really shocking to me, and if you've seen the Vice documentary, this part won't be very shocking to you, but they discussed how a bunch of the people in the MLM went and got the gastric sleeve surgery, which is essentially where they put, I think it's like an elastic band type of thing around part of your stomach. It shrinks your stomach so you eat less. Essentially how it came up for Courtney is she went out to dinner with like Deanne and some of the family. It definitely seems to me like they were getting some type of like referral bonus, but they had a bunch of the women all go down to Tijuana to have the gastric sleeve surgery, all by the same doctor who was referred to as Dr. Michelle. To me, it just seems like there was some type of payment there for them to bring people, because why would they care otherwise what doctor you go to? It just doesn't really make sense. But they touched on that a little bit. There was even like a group chat that was called Tijuana Lularoe Skinnies or something like that, and it was a group of people who either got the surgery or were thinking about it. And Courtney even mentioned that Lene or Leanne, whatever Deanne's sister's name was, would text her every single week asking her when she was going and like pressuring her into it. One critique I have of the documentaries, this is another thing that like throughout the series they kind of mentioned a little bit, like in the beginning scenes it was mentioned, and then they touched on it in kind of like the little rundown that I just gave you there, but I wish they touched more on it or like asked more. I mean, I understand people not wanting to talk about if they got the surgery or like anything like that to do with their health, but even if they asked like if they knew if they were getting a referral bonus or just things like that, like that's something that I've always wanted to know more, even ever since seeing the Vice documentary. I just feel like it was not touched on enough, and I feel like they definitely could have gotten more information about that in some way. They did ask Deanne if she was like forcing people to go down there, and she said no. You know, if people asked her what she did to lose weight, she just told them, and then if they wanted to go, they would have, kind of thing. But obviously like she lies through her teeth constantly, so why would we believe that? And another thing that the docuseries touched on in a big way was like the faulty stock issues, which if you've heard of Lularoe, you've probably seen that they were sending out like soaking wet leggings, moldy, sun bleached, ripping, everything like that. A big portion of why that was is because they outgrew, which again, they just could not keep up with the size of company they had. They outgrew their storage, and they were storing tons and tons and tons of clothes in like cages outside, so obviously outside in the weather, like rain and bugs and who knows what else. And an interesting thing that Roberta mentioned, so in the docuseries they mentioned that a lot of the prints were like limited edition, and once they sold out, they were sold out for good, which led to a lot of people what they called unicorn hunting, which is like searching for a rare pair of like leggings or whatever, like a rare print that you wanted. But later on, Roberta mentioned that after a while, when the leggings started to arrive like ripped and stinky and wet, that she was also receiving stuff that supposedly sold out 2 years ago. It was kind of unclear if they just never sold out or if the design team was recycling. And during this whole time with all the faulty stuff, which the docuseries went way more in detail into that, so I definitely suggest you check it out. I just, again, like I said, I don't want to recap every single thing, but they then had like a speaker at one of their conventions which they showed, and she was talking about drama and the victim mentality, basically. And she was talking about how this is what she said. So basically they're told, you know, if you're complaining about anything to do with Lularoe, you're the problem, which again, this is so heavily a cult tactic where they love bomb you when you're loving on the company, and then as soon as you have a negative thought, it's, well, you're the problem. Other people are having that and they're still happy, so what's wrong with you? Why are you not happy? You're just a whiner. You're just looking for drama. And then she went on to say that they're just playing the role of a victim, and she said when victims are telling their story repeatedly, they're seeking validation for someone to say, yes, you have a right to feel that way, and usually it comes with a lot of exaggeration, which this is something I had a huge issue with, not only because very obviously there were issues that people had a right to complain about, but also in general, like you're speaking to a crowd of probably 99% women and you're saying, oh, if you speak on your experiences, you're just seeking validation and you're exaggerating. So for her to go up to a group of women and say, if you're complaining about anything, that you're just playing the victim and you're exaggerating, and that other people do the same thing with a smile on their face, it's disgusting. And obviously they were referring to, like I said, the faulty leggings and people complaining about that. But I just feel like hearing someone that you look up to say that could definitely transfer into other areas of your life. Again, to say it, it's a very culty mentality that if you have something wrong, you're the problem and you can't say anything. And they even went on to say that one negative opinion in like your Facebook group or whatever can sour the whole group, and to use that delete button, it's very powerful. So basically they're saying if someone has a valid concern or complaint in your Facebook group, delete it before the others see and have the same mindset, and to only let the others see the positive experience, which again, it's giving very much cult. And the final episode dove mostly into the lawsuits, which again, if you want to know more information about those, I highly recommend watching the series. The lawsuits in 2017, it kind of sparked what they offered was a 100% buyback policy, and this was like a huge fiasco. So basically what the buyback policy was is it meant that anyone with like either leftover stock that didn't sell or that they didn't want, whatever patterns they didn't like, they could return it for the company and get 100% of the money they spent on it back. They also said, and a key part of this that was mentioned in the documentary was that they said that this policy was never going away, that it was there to stay. The buyback policy caused two things to happen. The first one was it caused a ton of people to join who were skeptical or kind of on the fence or worried about spending that much and not selling what they bought. A lot of the people decided, you know what, there's a lot less risk now, I'm gonna jump in and do it. But the second thing it caused was it caused a ton of people to leave the business, because, you know, if you're only staying in because you have $20,000 worth of stock sitting around that you feel stuck with, and then they say, hey, we'll buy that back for you and give you 100% of your money back, you're gonna send that back and be on your way if you were done with the company, right? So a lot of them mentioned that this caused what they called the mass exodus, where a lot of their downlines left like all in a pretty short period of time. It caused a huge uproar when, as I'm sure you guessed, that Lularoe decided to cancel that policy and that it was no longer happening after saying it would not be going away and that it was a permanent policy. And they touch way more into the issues that caused and the lawsuits that caused, because they essentially approved refunds and then didn't send them out, which is illegal. And another thing that I just don't get, and I didn't understand the entire time, which was kind of funny, is just how much Deanne and Mark lied about everything, knowing that there are like videos and Zoom calls and conferences with them saying the exact thing they're lying about in the future. It's just so weird to me. And then there was a lady named Jill who actually still loved Lularoe and she still wanted to stay in Lularoe. She said she wanted to stay in for as long as she could, like the rest of her life, or as long as Lularoe's around, she'll be in it. This was something I found really good that they included in a way, just because I feel like for a documentary to remain at least a little bit unbiased, like this is very clearly a biased look, but it was nice that they had someone in there being interviewed who was kind of on the opposite side, who hadn't quit and actually planned to stay in the business. I do wish they asked her a little bit more though, but Jill, the one who loved Lularoe, said something that I found kind of funny. She said if Lularoe is found guilty, every direct sales company should be investigated as well, which like, exactly, that's exactly what we want to happen. I feel like she was saying that to try to say like, you can't look into all of them, so why are you looking into mine? But the thing is, they can look into all of them, and they are all predatory and using the same tactics. And the rest of the documentary, it also just touched in a lot onto why Lularoe is being called a pyramid scheme, and how majority of the business came from recruitment, and how really the only way to make a decent living at Lularoe was to recruit. But overall, at the end, they were asked, like, what do you see for Lularoe 2.0? Or like, are you guys gonna keep going? And DM was like, yeah, like, we've created this amazing thing, we're still going, blah blah blah. Which to me, that kind of said like that they didn't really learn anything. Deanna and Mark didn't seem to learn anything from the experience, and if anything, they just think that people were out to get them. It's interesting to me why they would say everyone's out to get us, but yet the people who are supposedly out to get them are the only ones that are really suffering any consequences. But that's kind of all I wanted to say about the recap. I just wanted to quickly touch on like what I loved about the documentary and what I didn't really like about it. So as I mentioned, I did see the Vice documentary. Overall, I found the editing and narration in the LulaRich docuseries to be better and more interesting than in the Vice one. So in general, I feel like the LulaRich documentary is worth a watch even if you have seen the Vice one. There was a lot of different information, especially regarding corporate, which I really loved that. And that was all new to me information even after seeing the other one. And I did love all the various specialists that they had. Like they had an MLM specialist, they had an attorney, they had a couple of different people in between scenes kind of just speaking on like what they were talking about or why it's wrong, or you know, breaking down the lawsuits a little bit. And I found that to be really helpful, especially for someone like, obviously I know quite a bit about MLMs. You guys probably do too if you're watching this. If I was just a random viewer who saw that, clicked on it, and didn't know a thing about MLMs before, I feel like those people speaking was quite crucial to give people who don't know anything about MLMs an understanding of what was going on. I loved the editing, like how I mentioned that they would show Deanna and Mark saying one thing and then them lying about it to the Washington Attorney General's office. And yeah, overall, I just like the use of people's stories. The only things I didn't really love, which was not a lot, but I just wish they touched more on certain topics that they brought up. Like they brought up their Mormon faith a little bit and a bit of how it played into things. I would have liked to see that explored more. Mark was sort of referring to himself as if he was like the founder of Mormonism, and he was preaching Mormon gospel or whatever they would call it at the convention. So I just would have liked them to touch a little bit more on that. And I also feel like Deanna and Mark's faith in Mormonism is quite ingrained with the company, and I mean, I would assume all of their kids share the same faith and they were all working in corporate. So I would have liked to see more on that. I would have liked to see more about, you know, when they touched on that it was a white-centric idea. I would have liked to see a lot more information and education on that personally. And with Jill, who was the woman who said she loved it, I wish they would have asked her more, just because I feel like if you're gonna have someone with a very differing opinion, it would have been more helpful if there was more of a purpose of her being there aside from her to just say that she loves Lularoe. Like I would have liked to see them ask her how she feels about everything that went on, if she got any faulty stock, how she felt about that or how she dealt with that, how her business is doing, how she justifies staying in it after seeing all of this. Like I just would have liked to see more, and it was very obvious that she was aware of the lawsuit, so I wish they asked her like, well, doesn't that make you skeptical of the business? But overall, I really loved it, and it's definitely still worth seeing even if you've already watched a lot about Lularoe. I feel like a lot of it was new information to me, and I liked how they were interviewing actual people in corporate Lularoe, like Sam and Deanna Mark, things like that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed my thoughts and a little bit of a recap on this. Let me know down below what you thought if you watched it. I would love to hear what you liked and didn't like as well. And with that being said, hit that subscribe before you head out, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!